Tonight, the Homeland Security Secretary in the hot seat as the end of Title 42 nears.
Our immigration system has been broken for decades. How
some Texas lawmakers are blaming the current administration for problems at the border. Plus, the Supreme Court delays by 48 hours the fate of a widely used abortion pill. And later,
if this bill passes in Texas, I think this will have a chilling effect nationwide.
As a plan to take certain books off school library shelves moves forward, some parents and librarians are raising concerns. Capitol Tonight starts right now.
And you, sir, I believe are complicit with this by your inaction at the border.
To say that we are doing nothing is an absolute falsehood.
A tense hearing on Capitol Hill today as House Republicans grilled the Homeland Security Secretary over his agency's handling of the southern border. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Karina Kling. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas also came face to face with two grieving mothers from Texas whose children died. Republicans claimed it happened because of the Biden administration's border policies. Our Washington reporter Rena Diamante has more.
Congressman.
Mr. Secretary, they're standing there, and I think they deserve an apology from you.
And then Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas did just that on Wednesday, apologizing to a Texas mother at a heated House hearing. Elisa Tambunga's 7-year-old daughter Amelia and her mother Maria were killed when an alleged human trafficker crashed into them during a high-speed chase with law enforcement in the West Texas town of Azona.
I want change. I want action. I want laws enforced and policies enforced. I can't sleep. I still can't eat that well. I have to find a new purpose, and she was my entire purpose.
Every day in my district, they ask me, why isn't the border secure?
The hearing by the GOP-led Homeland Security Committee was supposed to be about the agency's budget, but Republicans teed off on the administration's border policies.
We have a problem at our border. We have families that are suffering. This was one example of hundreds of thousands.
Questioning was split on party lines. Texas Republicans dismissed Mayorkas' claims his agency has control over the border. And Democrats challenged the notion that former President Donald Trump's border policies worked.
Hundreds of children were detained for more than 72 hours in violation of the law, and that was when our Border Patrol agents and others were overwhelmed. Mr. Secretary, would you please remind me who was president in 2019?
After the hearing, Mayorkas met privately with Tambunga as well as another Texas mother, Kim Gillihan of Cyprus, whose 14-year-old son died from a fentanyl overdose.
I really would love to see change is the White House actually having a COVID-like response to this.
There's a face to the border crisis, and I know that doesn't get across as much. You hear about it, but you don't see it. So that's what we came here to do.
The secretary maintained his agency is working within the limitations of a broken system and is striving to maximize resources to deliver the most effective results, which in his view is maintaining operational control of the border. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
Joining us now to discuss this further is Alvaro Corral. He's a political science professor at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, and specializes in immigration. Professor Corral, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Karina. Nice to be with you.
Thanks for being with us. What is your take on not just the tone of these hearings with Secretary Mayorkas, but just the tone in general in Washington surrounding immigration? I mean, just more of the acknowledgement of how divided congressional members are over on this issue?
Yes, I think division is the key word. The American public has really divided politically along this issue to the point where, tell me where you stand on immigration, and I can kind of probably guess where you stand between the two parties. And I believe that Secretary Mayorkas has become the lightning rod, especially among the right, with all issues relating to the border and border security. That probably explains some of the kind of heated exchanges that he's been having with members of Congress who have asked him to come and testify about the state of the U.S.-Mexico border, and some of whom have also called even for his impeachment due to some of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, what about the prep, speaking to that, the prep that's being done for the end of Title 42? Because we're speaking about the split between Republicans and Democrats, but some Democrats say the Biden administration needs to do more. I mean, what are you expecting?
My general sense is that the administration has been, undergoing lots of preparations for what I believe is this kind of May 11th date in which Title 42 will expire, because the larger federal government is also ending or sunsetting various kind of CDC health provisions, right? And of course, Title 42, less of an immigration policy and actually more of an invocation of a public health concern in order to then manage the border in a certain way, which has been, expulsing people who might otherwise potentially be able to ask for asylum, right? So in terms of the intra-party division, there were some voices a couple of months ago who were concerned about kind of preemptively pulling the rug from Title 42, despite the fact that data suggests that in terms of recidivism, like, sure, on the one hand, it gives you somewhat faster expulsions, but because there isn't much of a stick in terms of the penalties associated with it, there was higher rates of recidivism. And so more people kind of doing multiple attempts to cross. And so that actually leads to inflated numbers at the border. Sure. And so there was concern around what to do. And obviously since January, the Biden administration has instituted new parole rules that apply to certain countries as a way to ease the acceptance of more people presenting themselves, especially from these particular countries who we know are driving not all, but the vast majority of encounters at the border.
We just have about 30 seconds left, but they've been saying expect a migrant surge. The Biden administration is saying expect a surge with the end of Title 42. I mean, what do you think we can expect?
Well, I think something to keep in mind for viewers is that migration, as the name implies, it's kind of seasonal, right? And we often want to think about it in ways that we can kind of very firmly control, but migration is of course unpredictable. And we do know from going back years of data that due to climate concerns, the spring and the fall tend to coincide with some slightly higher numbers at the border, regardless of what the policy is, frankly, and that all presidents have experienced. So I think that's probably natural, and I think people and the Biden administration is trying to prepare for that in terms of justifying, natural, what they would say rises in encounters at the border.
Professor Corral, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. The Supreme Court is buying itself more time in a major Texas abortion case, this one involving a widely used abortion pill. The court is extending access to the pill for 48 hours to give it more time to consider the case. Taylor Popolars joins us from Washington with more.
The Supreme Court issued a brief one-page order that temporarily extends access to the most commonly used abortion pill. That extension gives the justices more time to consider whether they want to allow a lower court's restrictions on the medication, while a broader challenge to the pill's approval makes its way through the courts. Like when Roe v. Wade was overturned last year, there is a clear political divide over what the outcome should be in this case. House Democrats held a press conference Wednesday morning calling on the justices to uphold what has been legal for 2 decades.
We don't want a Texas judge in our bedrooms telling us what to do. We don't want a Supreme Court justice in our bedrooms telling us what to do, or a state official telling us what to do.
Democrat Pramila Jayapal of Washington State spoke out about her own experience having an abortion and why access to that type of treatment helped her during a high-risk pregnancy. The abortion pill Mifepristone was approved by the Food and Drug Administration in 2000 and is used in more than half of all U.S. abortions. A judge in Texas ruled this month that it should lose its FDA approval, and subsequent rulings pushed the case to the Supreme Court. Republicans like Missouri Senator Josh Hawley hope the conservative-leaning court will keep the Texas ruling in place.
The FDA, their approvals, drug approvals are challenged all the time, and thank the Lord they are, because I don't want Big Pharma, who usually stands to make the most money off of these drugs, I don't want them to have a free hand here and never be questioned about what they get the FDA to do.
The Supreme Court's latest order means Mifepristone remains available until 11:59 Friday night, unless the court takes action before then. In Washington, Taylor Popolars, Spectrum News.
The Supreme Court cleared the way for a Texas death row inmate to try to use DNA to prove his innocence. Rodney Reed was convicted of killing Stacey Stites in 1998. He's maintained his innocence and tried to get crime scene evidence tested for traces of DNA. The Texas court had initially denied Reed's use of DNA testing, saying he waited too long to bring the claim. The Supreme Court disagreed, and now Reed can go to a federal court to make his claim. Turning now to the Texas legislature, today the House okayed a bill that would remove books from school libraries if they're considered harmful or sexually explicit. Proponents of the bill say kids shouldn't have access to inappropriate material at school, but opponents argue the definitions are too vague and will lead to the removal of classic and diverse literature. Charlotte Scott reports.
In the heart of the state capitol, some Texans read books that have been challenged or removed from public school libraries. A silent protest to show they don't support a growing movement to take books off shelves.
I would so much more prefer for a kid to experience something challenging or dangerous through the safety of a book than trying something like that in real life. Books are safe when there's so much else in our world that isn't safe.
Emily Hirsch is a librarian in Austin's independent school district. Many books that have already been questioned have to do with issues related to people of color and the LGBTQ community.
Those are my students. Those are the underrepresented voices in young adult and children's literature, and those are the voices in books that my children need to see.
That's why she doesn't support a bill by Frisco area Representative Jared Patterson. It would prohibit librarians from purchasing books that could be deemed harmful, sexually explicit, or pervasively vulgar. Some lawmakers are concerned that these terms are too vague and will lead to classic books being removed from public school libraries.
There was a book in Frisco ISD where well over 100 times it used the F word in the book. That would be deemed as pervasively vulgar.
My concern is that if we are now mandating that libraries remove anything that's pervasively vulgar, that may include Catcher in the Rye, because Catcher in the Rye, as I've mentioned to you before, has more than 200 curse words.
Classic works of literature is certainly not the target of this bill.
Representative Patterson says he's only targeting pornographic material. The House initially approved the bill in a mostly party line vote, but the educators outside the House chamber say what kids read should be up to their parents, not lawmakers.
No small group of adults should be able to make that choice for a whole community. That's censorship.
As this bill advances, the debate about what kids can check out from school libraries is bound to continue. For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
Welcome back. Let's get a check now of some of the other political stories making headlines across the state. The Texas House added public officers to a bill that increases the penalty for giving alcohol to a minor. This comes after State Representative Brian Slayton was accused of giving alcohol to a staffer under 21 and having sex with her. Every member, including Slayton, voted for the amendment. Similar legislation was introduced in the state Senate. State senators approved a sweeping school safety bill today in response to the Uvalde school shooting nearly a year ago. It aims to strengthen schools' active shooter plans, better train school district police officers, and strengthen the state's truancy laws. It passed with unanimous support, despite some saying it lacked sufficient funding to improve school security. And State Senator Roland Gutierrez of San Antonio is very likely to challenge U.S. Senator Ted Cruz in 2024. The San Antonio Express-News first reported sources close to Gutierrez said he's seriously looking at it. Gutierrez represents Uvalde and has become a fierce ally of the families affected by the school shooting there. He declined to comment today, but recently told us he's focused on the legislative session right now. Families of the victims of the Uvalde school shooting waited more than 12 hours yesterday to testify to a House committee hearing several gun bills. They've been coming to the Capitol for months, but this time their priority bill to raise the age to buy certain semi-automatic weapons from 18 to 21 was up for debate. The Uvalde gunman used an AR-15 style rifle, which he bought just days after he turned 18. The hearing ended just before 2 a.m. with hours of emotional testimony.
18 to 21 isn't much to ask. As a grieving mother, I'm begging you to please hear me out and don't let my daughter's murder mean nothing to you.
Faces an uphill climb in the Republican-controlled legislature. A state lawmaker who's pushing for Texas parents to get 12 weeks paid parental leave says her bill is dead. The Texas Family Act would guarantee Texas's full-time workers 12 weeks of paid leave up to $1,000 a week upon the birth or adoption of a new child. The measure had bipartisan support in the House, but the bill's author said she's been informed it won't even get a hearing. She says the bill's financing mechanism drew the ire of some of Texas's powerful business groups. Earlier this session, the House Speaker implemented 12 weeks paid parental leave for those working in the Texas House and prioritized maternal health care and resources for families. We want to bring in the bill's author now to discuss what's going on. Houston Democratic Representative Penny Morales-Shaw, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. Why are some business groups against this? We mentioned the funding mechanism. What's going on?
Well, the claim is that this is burdensome on businesses, but in actuality, we pass so many laws that impose items on businesses every session. We have some now. This shouldn't be a fight. This is literally costing businesses pennies on the dollar, and government pennies on the dollar. It's a program that pays for itself, and the employer doesn't end up paying for the paternal leave. It's actually the fund that covers it. And look, nobody was celebrating when we passed employment laws, unemployment income laws, or when businesses had to expend to do ADA compliance, build bigger bathrooms and make ramps. Nobody was celebrating when we did those things, but we did them, and we're a better place for doing that. And that's really what this bill is about. It's about changing the culture of Texas. We're waving a pro-family, pro-children banner. Let's go all the way with it. Let's finish the job that we started. That's what this is about.
Well, and what kind of conversations have you had with the business groups, with the head of the committee that was set to hear the bill? The Texas Association of Business did send us a statement and basically said what you're saying: the government mandated programs are costly and create regulatory burdens. But have you had any conversations with them about possibly tweaking the bill to get it moved further along?
Absolutely. I think any lawmaker knows that they have to reach out to stakeholders, they have to reach out to interest groups and try to get on the same page so that you can try to make amendments and modifications. And frankly, in this case, I think that contacting the business interest groups was the poison pill. I did reach out to them. We did hear their concerns. We made modifications. We made concessions in our bill that we thought satisfied their concerns and even concerns of other members. We took that into serious consideration. We still think it was a phenomenal bill that would have served many people, roughly about 144,000 right off the bat. So we did talk to them. And as far as the chairwoman, did you mention the chairwoman?
Yeah.
We spoke to the chairwoman many times. I mean, we have to go to them and request hearings because obviously the first stop for any proposed legislation is to get a committee hearing and have it heard. Both sides can come in, and you got the pros and the cons of a bill. Sure. And that's what empowers the legislators on that committee to decide whether or not to vote this out.
Yeah.
But if you don't even have that first stage of the democratic process to have something heard and hear the pros and cons, your bill doesn't have the opportunity to go to the next stage, which is the House and Senate vote. So yeah, we had a commitment from the chairwoman. We were excited about it. We were supposed to have our hearing last week on the bill, and then there was a reneging on that commitment, on that verbal commitment. And again, I think it was a poison pill to have the business interest groups chime in on this.
We just have about 30 seconds left, but there are bills advancing that give paid parental leave to state workers. So not all like your bill was looking to do for full-time workers, but do you support those? Do you think those will make a difference?
I absolutely support it. I think it's a partial measure. I mean, state employees were not the only limited group that lost their rights to family planning and to be able to have access to how they wanted to form their families. This is a statewide issue, so I do think it's a good start. At least we're starting somewhere, and absolutely I'm happy to support that bill, and I hope that my bill will be the next step to give those rights to everyone.
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Still to come on Capitol tonight, the siege in Waco 30 years later, how a new documentary recounts the tragedy. 30 years ago today, the siege at a compound in Waco came to a tragic end. By the end of a 51-day standoff between Branch Davidians and law enforcement, 86 people had died, including 28 children. Decades later, the people at the center of it all tell their story in a gripping new documentary. Our Brett Shipp has more.
Do you put your trust in the Lord?
I am the Lord.
In a meticulously documented account, Waco, American Apocalypse on Netflix relives the 51-day siege.
75 men around our building and they're shooting at us at Mount Carmel, telling their children and women in here to call it off.
From the firefight and assault on the compound by ATF agents in February to the deadly finale in April. Out front on much of the reporting was Lee Hancock with the Dallas Morning News, who arrived on the scene on day one.
You know, it was a very volatile and fluid situation, and just trying to figure out even the basics of who shot who, how did this go wrong?
For the next 50 days, David Koresh engaged federal agents in a high-stakes game of Hold'em that ended on April 19th, when lead agents decided they had had enough. Tanks were sent in, tear gas deployed, fires broke out, and then the inferno.
You know, there were a lot of people, you know, both in the media and certainly in the American public and around the world going, how could you have let this happen?
Documentary director Tiller Russell, who grew up in Dallas, says rather than to assess blame for the tragedy, he wanted to present the facts and let the audience decide who or what was to blame. But one thing became clear during his 18 months of production, one recurring theme.
The Davidians had a hard time communicating what they wanted to communicate. Within the FBI, there were these divisions. And so that's, I think, the kind of defining theme of Waco is this profound failure to communicate.
Hancock agrees. The bottom line was this: 75 Davidians and children should not have died that day.
That lack of communication, and try for something different. Negotiators tried. I think we in the media tried to the extent we could. But this is an American tragedy that I think this documentary captures in a way I think we need to remember.
And that is all the time that we have tonight. We're back again tomorrow with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Have a great night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app and tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV to get live news coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.